Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Acupuncture is My Life show. Now, in today's episode, I'd like to discuss the functions of the lungs from an acupuncturist perspective. Okay? What I need you to do at the moment is, before I get into discussing the lungs, I need you to momentarily attempt to block your understanding of the Western concept of the internal organs completely. Are you ready? Now, you see, the lungs to an acupuncturist functions different from the way in which a physician would see it. Now, you see, to an acupuncturist, the lungs govern both chi and respiration. And it also controls the channels and the blood vessels, as well as being responsible for, let's say, the diffusing and descending of chi. Now, this is very important because your lungs and your heart, although I'm speaking of just the lungs in this episode, your lungs and your heart are the two yin organs that are in the uppermost part of your body. So you see, with the lungs being in the uppermost part, as a yin organ, its chi must go down, whereas yin organs that are in the lowermost part of the body, their chi tends to go up. But in this case, the lungs control the channels and blood vessels, as well as it's responsible for the diffusing and descending of chi. Okay, so it pushes chi out and sends it down. Now, the lungs to an acupuncturist are also responsible for regulating all physiological activities. And this is because, or this is due to the diffusing and descending aspects of chi. But not only that, and I'll get into that shortly. Now, when it comes to governing chi and respiration, this is to be understood as the lungs' ability to take in pure, clean air and discharge unclean air, that being the gases from your body. Now, this function ensures the adequate functioning of the body's physiological processes, which accepts chi as its basis. Okay? You see, the lungs are considered the most external of all yin organs. And that's because the lung stands between the body and the outside world relative to its purpose. Because this is the case, the lungs are easily affected by external pathogenic factors such as common cold, flu, pneumonia, as well as other respiratory disorders. Because your lungs govern your skin and the space between the skin and the muscles, but more so your skin. And this is why it's stated that it stands between the body and the outside world. Now, the lungs are also responsible for controlling the channels as well as the blood vessels. That's because the lungs govern chi, which means the lungs assist the heart in circulating blood, because without chi, guess what? Blood cannot circulate within the vessels due to the fact that blood requires chi to move. And this is another aspect of yin and yang. And yin being blood and yang being chi. Chi is active, blood is nourishing. But guess what? Blood cannot move unless there's chi involved to move it throughout the blood vessels. And this is why I stated the lungs are responsible for controlling the channels as well as the blood vessels. Now, Another important function of the lungs is to control the descending and diffusing of qi. Because the lungs are located, as I previously stated, in the uppermost jiao or section of the three jiaos, three main sections of the body. In its governing qi, it is responsible for sending qi downward, especially to the kidneys. Now, the kidneys and the lungs have a very, very important relationship when it comes to qi. And I want you to keep that in the back of your head. And the reason is I'm covering the functions of both yin and yang organs is because in the next few weeks, when I begin to discuss different types of disorders or diseases that many individuals are susceptible to, I'm going to bring up certain yin or yang organ patterns, and you'll be able to reflect on these early episodes. So when I say things like lung qi deficiency, relative to someone with asthma, you would know it has to do with wheezing and shortness of breath, and so forth and so on. So try and put what I'm stating to you or discussing with regard to the functions of the various yin organs and yang organs. Try and find a place in your mind, in your memory, to place it, so that when I start again discussing disorders, it all comes together, and then you can understand or have a better understanding as to how an acupuncturist diagnoses or can diagnose certain disorders. All right. Now, if the lungs fail to send qi downward, an individual, let's say, can experience incessant cough, shortness of breath, chest depression. So this is an example of what I'm saying, as to why I'm speaking of the functions of these organs, why it's different from the Western concept of the internal organs, so that you can better understand acupuncture. And when you begin to see an acupuncturist, or if you're already seeing one, you'll understand when they'd say to you, you're suffering from spleen qi deficiency with liver qi stagnation, so forth and so on. I'm just throwing that out there. Now, back to the lungs. Now, when it comes to the diffusing of qi, the lungs are responsible for diffusing qi all over the body via the space between the skin and muscles. Now remember, that's when I stated earlier why the lungs are more susceptible to external pathogenic factors, because it's the organ that's closest to the outside world. Now, this diffusion is how the skin and muscles are kept warm and how the body is protected from exterior pathogenic factors. Now, as an acupuncturist, when I say the lungs regulate all physiological activities, I mean when you consider qi as energy, and energy being required for all physiological activities to take place, and you include that with the understanding, as stated earlier, that the lungs govern qi, would therefore support why an acupuncturist would view the lungs as being able to regulate all physiological activity. Now, here's something that should be of interest to you. Let's say I'll use an example of mine as an acupuncturist. Whenever a patient is suffering from some type of lung disorder, as part of evaluating a patient, an acupuncturist would also assess the state of a patient's body hair. Now, this is key because the lungs manifest itself on a person's body hair. This is because the diffusing function of the lung relative to diffusing qi to the skin this chi is responsible for moistening as well as nourishing body hair. And an acupuncturist will look to see if, let's say, the body hair is presenting as withered or brittle or dry in quality. This would send off like certain signals to an acupuncturist, like assess the lung meridian or the lung organ. But as I stated, the main function of the lung is that of governing chi. And when this chi is deficient, a myriad of issues can happen, from coughing to breathing to chest discomfort to fatigue. And this is considered to be a deficiency pattern of the lungs. And now I want to get into different types of patterns that the lung can face and give you some of the symptoms that you can experience so that you'd have a better understanding of, if you're going through some of these symptoms, what type of pattern you may be facing, and you can sit with your acupuncturist and discuss it as well. And remember when I said the lungs are also responsible for diffusing and descending chi? Now this is in relation to also body fluids and defensive chi, which is why the lungs are considered the most exterior organ controlling the skin and defensive chi, because defensive chi moves between the skin and the muscles, as I stated earlier, keeping the body warm and protecting it from exterior pathogenic factors. And with this being the case, it represents why the lungs are the first organ to be affected by exterior pathogenic factors. And that's usually when there's a deficiency, again, of chi, in this case being defensive chi. All right? And there are various types of exterior pathogenic factors that can affect the lungs as an organ. And those types of factors can be, let's say, wind, heat, fire, cold, dampness, and dryness. Take a second and think about that. There are certain days when it's windy out. Sometimes how can that affect breathing, energy? There are days when it's really hot. And then when it's super hot, that's when, fire as a pathogen can affect you. Then when it's cold. In certain cases, how does asthmatics respond to extremely cold weather? Also when it's damp out and really sticky, how does that affect your breathing? And even when it's really dry, it can be dry both inside and outside, just like it can be cold both inside and outside. Then you'll experience, let's say, a dry cough, things of that nature. So these can all be considered exterior pathogenic factors because it's exterior to the body. But when I get a little more specific, you can combine some of these pathogens, most notably, let's say, cold and heat, to form like wind cold, when it's windy outside but it's cold at the same time, and you just want to get inside or cover up, really protect yourself. Or even wind heat. Wind cold and wind heat are usually the more common exterior pathogenic factors that tend to attack the lungs. And let's discuss dryness. Dryness can affect the lungs. It can injure the lungs too. because the lungs need a certain amount of moisture in order to function properly. So let's say when you're outside and you're faced with excessively dry weather, the lungs can become dry. Again, resulting in symptoms such as, like, let's say, dry cough, dry throat, and even dry skin. You remember when I said the lungs can warm the skin, leads to moisture, and pay attention to body hair? So when there's dryness, it affects the lungs, which in turn affects your skin. Now, dampness as an exterior pathogenic factor tends to attack your lungs directly, with only one exception. It's when it's combined with wind. Because then it impairs the lungs' diffusing and descending functions. And it affects the function of regulating the water passages. And this is when you'll see, like, a person who presents with like a puffy face. It just seems like, I mean, that's considered facial edema. But now, this is how dampness, this is an example of dampness affecting or attacking the lungs. And the lungs' ability to regulate the water passages within have been affected, and the person will present with facial edema. Now, diet can affect lung function as well. Let's say when you eat too much in the way of cold, raw types of foods. Cold and raw foods can generate internal dampness as well as phlegm. But along with cold and raw foods, let's say excessive consumption of greasy foods or dairy foods can also give rise to phlegm. And phlegm in the lungs can cause problems. More times than not, we expectorate it. And then you're going to look at the color, and that's going to say a lot. Like clear phlegm, an acupuncturist can determine that can be a wind-cold issue. Yellow phlegm is wind heat, and so forth, and I'll get into that. Emotions can affect the lungs as well. Let's say sadness, grief. Sadness and grief tends to deplete lung qi, thereby causing deficiency of lung qi. And deficient qi in the chest would then fail to circulate properly, and qi stagnation in the chest would result. And that's when you feel like this distension in your chest, as if it can be like congested or what's going on. It just feels distended up there. Now, worry is another emotion that can affect your lungs as well. It tends to cause qi to like stagnate or knot up like a ball. And that'll present, let's say, again, in feeling like tightness in the chest. And it'll also accompany, what would also accompany that is like symptoms of breathlessness or sighing. Life's habits, certain habits such as living a sedentary lifestyle, where you're sitting for long periods of time and you're bent over, let's say at a desk, or you're on your computer, tablet, phone, or you can just even be reading. This sedentary lifestyles or sedentary lifestyle tends to weaken lung qi, because the chest is basically impeded in proper breathing becomes impaired, which can present or be diagnosed as lung qi deficiency. So, it's not just exterior pathogenic factors such as wind, heat, fire, cold, damp, and dryness, but diet can cause issues with the lungs, create patterns, emotions, life habits. And one of the main issues is lung qi deficiency, which is an empty pattern. How would you know if you have lung qi deficiency, or the qi in your lungs is deficient? It's because you'll experience like shortness of breath, a slight cough, a weak voice, and you would even sometimes spontaneously sweat during the day. You wouldn't like to talk much, and your complexion would present as, let's say, pale. And you'd notice like you catch colds a lot. You'll question yourself as to why is that. You'll feel tired a lot, and you wouldn't even like cold temperature, going out in the cold, let's say fall, winter, or air conditioning. It's a sign of lung qi deficiency. And what can cause lung qi deficiency? One, it can be hereditary. This can be genetically passed down. I've treated patients of such. Another can be emotional stress, as I'd stated, or life habits, let's say emotional stress such as sadness and grief, again, which depletes lung qi. And deficient qi fails to move in the chest, results in qi stagnation. Life habits can cause it, as I'd stated, sedentary lifestyle. Even, you ever see like sports coaches or teachers, excessive use of your voice for many, many years can result in lung qi deficiency, along with exterior pathogenic factors that I stated, when cold, when heat, when damp, can cause lung qi deficiency. Whereas an acupuncturist, I would tonify lung qi and warm the yang. Now, outside of qi, then there can be lung yin deficiency. It's the nourishing aspect. This is important, because a person with lung yin deficiency would present with like a dry cough, and they'll have sticky, like scanty sputum. There'll be a weak or hoarse voice, dry mouth, dry throat, tickly sensation on the throat. They'll be tired a lot, thin body, thin chest with night sweating. What can cause that? Again, emotional stress, life habits. Now you see, lung yin deficiency usually occurs in middle-aged or even elderly people as a result of, let's say, working too much, smoking, poor diet. And in rare cases, lung yin deficiency can develop even in a child who experiences whooping cough. That's called pertussis. How would an acupuncturist treat that? Generally, they would look to tonify lung yin, nourish body fluids, and if they have to, they would clear empty heat. Now let's look at lung dryness. Remember I spoke of that earlier, where there will be dry cough, dry skin, dry throat, dry mouth, thirst, hoarse voice. Why? Because of exterior dryness. When you're exposed to dryness for long periods of time, and even hot weather in dry environments, this can affect the lungs. Irregular diet can too. Like if you eat at the worst times in which you should be eating, like right before bed, late at night, and then you also worry about something. Let's say you're worrying about your job while you're eating. this can also induce lung dryness. How would an acupuncturist, or how can they look at it? They would moisten your lungs, nourish your fluids. See, these are examples of deficiency patterns. But a person can experience full patterns, let's say such as invasion of the lungs by wind cold, where there would be aversion to cold, cough with an itchy throat, slight breathlessness, blocked or runny nose with clear watery discharge, sneezing, and then you would experience a headache like in the back of your head, like around your occipital region, along with body aches. What can cause this? Exposure to wind, exposure to cold, and there are artificial sources of wind cold, so it's not like you're outside in the winter, frigid temperatures. Air conditioning can cause this. Being in refrigerated storerooms can cause this. And this is considered a full pattern. An acupuncturist would release the exterior, like expel cold, stimulate the descending and diffusing function of lung qi, because then it's been affected as a result of an exterior pathogenic factor. And that's wind cold. Now, what happens when the lungs are affected by wind heat? There would still be wind cold, but then there'll be a fever with cough, sore throat, runny nose with like a yellowish discharge. Remember I stated earlier, yellow mucus is a sign of heat. There'll be sneezing, headache, body aches, sweating, thirst, swollen tonsils. And this is due to exposure to wind as well as heat. Now you'll still have an aversion to cold even though you've been exposed to wind heat. But this is because the pathogenic factor, that being wind heat, obstructed the circulation of your defensive qi. And now you can no longer warm the muscles because the qi is not circulating throughout the body between the skin and muscles. And then also with wind heat, because heat is an exterior pathogenic factor, dries up your body fluids. This results in thirst and sore throat. So an acupuncturist would look to release the exterior, this external pathogenic factor, clear up heat, and reinvigorate the descending and diffusing of lung qi. All right? These things are important. You can also experience in full pattern interior, that's lung heat, damp phlegm in the lungs. But I want you guys to just be patient and understand why I'm going over each internal yin organ as well as each internal yang organ and its functions. Again, so when I begin to discuss COPD, emphysema, diabetes, high blood pressure, so forth and so on, things will begin to connect. Some of what I'm discussing now you may forget, as well as from other episodes and functions of other organs. But you can always go back and listen to it again to connect the dots. Because acupuncture is amazing. And there's certain symptomology or symptom patterns that I'll explain to you as I continue to go along, that when you experience certain issues, you would know what's going on and you would understand why it's best to go see your acupuncturist, to sit with your acupuncturist. Even contact acupuncturists in my life, whatever's convenient for you. Because making acupuncture a part of your life is extremely important. But I still have more organs and its functions to go over. More to teach you about the basics, not just its functions, but patterns that can affect it, that can identify or attach to certain diseases or disorders that you experience. But just remember, make acupuncture a part of your life, because acupuncture is my life. What's yours?